Picture this. It's 1173 after Christ, and somewhere deep in the heart of Sherwood Forest, death is about to arrive on silent wings. The pre-dawn air hangs thick with mist, the kind of bone-chilling dampness that makes even the hardiest woodsman pull his cloak tighter. And there, standing like some primordial monument to raw power, is Ironheart. Now, when I say this is no ordinary elk, I mean this creature has transcended the normal boundaries of what we'd call wildlife and entered the realm of legend. 6 feet of antler span, FHO, that's wider than most men are tall. Hooves the size of dinner plates that have, according to the chronicles, crushed 3 knights' skulls in the past winter alone. Think about that for a moment. This isn't some docile forest creature we're talking about. This is 1,500 pounds of muscle, bone, and barely controlled fury that has been turning King Henry's finest hunters into cautionary tales for 5 solid years. The royal hunting parties would come thundering through these woods with their dogs, their horns, their elaborate pageantry. TA and Ironheart would vanish like smoke, leaving behind only trampled earth and the occasional dead hound. But this morning, this particular morning that would change everything, something moves through that mist that even Ironheart cannot detect, something that has mastered what no man before him had ever achieved. The art of absolute silence. His name is Wilfred of Sherwood, and he's about to demonstrate why the course of medieval warfare is about to take a very different turn. Now, to understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back, way back, 25 years earlier, to be precise, to a village called Thornwood that most of you have never heard of and never will again. It's one of those places that gets swallowed by history, existing only in the memories of those who lived there, and the records of scribes who bothered to write down the ordinary tragedies of ordinary people. Young Wilfred, maybe 8 years old, scrawny as a winter sparrow, is watching something that will reshape his entire understanding of the world. His father, a village hunter of no particular renown, is participating in one of those chaotic noble hunts that were more about spectacle than skill. Picture the scene. Dozens of riders, baying hounds, servants with spears, the whole medieval circus crashing through the forest like some kind of organized catastrophe. And then it happens. A panicked elk, not Ironheart, mind you, this is a different beast entirely, breaks from the pack and charges directly into the hunting party. Wilfred's father, trying to protect a fallen nobleman, steps directly into the animal's path. What follows is exactly what you'd expect when 1,500 pounds of terrified wildlife meets a 160-pound peasant. The boy watches his father die beneath those hooves, watches the light go out of his eyes while the nobles argue about whose fault it was and whether the hunt should continue, and in that moment, something fundamental shifts in young Wilfred's mind. The fascination that most children have with these magnificent creatures transforms into something deeper, darker, more purposeful. Obsession, you might call it. Over the next several years, while other boys his age are learning to plough fields or work leather, Wilfred is living rough in the forest. And I mean really living rough, sleeping in hollow trees, eating whatever he can catch or forage, studying the patterns of elk herds with the intensity of a scholar poring over ancient texts. But he's not just watching the elk, he's watching their predators, the wolves. Medieval people knew wolves were dangerous, but they didn't really understand how wolves hunt. They saw the pack mentality, the coordination, but they missed the crucial element that Wilfred picked up on. The silence. Watch a wolf pack take down an elk, and you'll notice something remarkable. These predators can move through the forest without making a sound that alerts their prey. They've mastered something that human hunters, with all their noise and bluster, had never even attempted: absolute stealth. But knowing what you want to achieve and figuring out how to achieve it are two entirely different things. Wilfred spends years trying to replicate what the wolves do naturally. He practices walking without breaking twigs, breathing without making sound, moving without disturbing the forest's natural rhythms. He gets good at it, very good. But there's still something missing. The breakthrough comes through the most unlikely source imaginable: Brother Thomas, a Benedictine monk who's wandering through the forest on some religious pilgrimage that the chronicles don't bother to explain. Picture this weathered old man in rough brown robes encountering this wild forest boy who's been living like an animal for years. Most monks would have tried to drag Wilfrid back to civilization, lecture him about proper Christian behavior, maybe arrange for him to be apprenticed to some tradesman. But Brother Thomas is different. He sees something in the boy's obsession that speaks to a deeper truth about the natural world. True silence, the monk tells him, doesn't come from the absence of sound. It comes from harmony with the rhythms that already exist. Think about that concept for a moment. The medieval mind wasn't equipped to handle ideas like this. Most people thought in terms of domination, man over nature, lord over peasant, strong over weak. But here's this monk suggesting something radically different, that true power comes from working with natural forces rather than against them. And that's when Wilfrid makes his discovery. Owl feathers. Specifically, the flight feathers from great eagle owls, prepared in a very particular way, cleaned with beeswax, attached to arrow shafts with sinew in a precise spiral pattern that took him months to perfect. Combined with a bowstring wrapped in rabbit fur that's been soaked in rendered elk fat. The result? An arrow that slices through the air without making the telltale whistle that every archer since the dawn of time had simply accepted as unavoidable. But having the technology is only part of the equation. Wilfrid still needs to prove it works, and more importantly, he needs someone to witness it working, because in the medieval world, a miracle that nobody sees is just another story that nobody believes. Which brings us back to that misty morning in 1173, with Ironheart standing sentinel over his harem, completely unaware that his 5-year reign of terror is about to come to an end. Lord Edmund of Nottingham is watching from the tree line, along with several rival nobles who've been invited to witness what they assume will be another spectacular failure. After all, if the king's best hunters can't bring down Ironheart, what chance does some wild-looking peasant have? Wilfrid moves forward through the mist, step by careful step, until he's close enough to see the scars from previous hunts marking Ironheart's massive flanks. 15 yards away. Close enough to smell the musk of the great elk, close enough to count the points on those legendary antlers. He draws his bow, the specially prepared string making no sound as it stretches. The owl-feathered arrow knocks silently against the grip, and somewhere in the distance, a noble whispers a prayer to whatever saint protects hunters from their own stupidity. The arrow flies without a whisper, striking exactly where the heartbeat is strongest. Ironheart falls without even knowing that death has come for him, and in that moment, everything changes. Word spreads like wildfire through the medieval world, and let me tell you, in an age before printing presses or telegraph lines, that's saying something. By 1178, after Christ, A2, just 5 years after that, legendary shot that brought down Ironheart, Wilfrid of Sherwood has become the kind of figure that songs are written about and nobles lose sleep over. But here's the thing about revolutionary techniques in the medieval world. They don't stay secret for long. Every lord, every knight, every ambitious peasant with a bow wants to know how it's done. And Wilfrid, despite his preference for solitude, finds himself in the uncomfortable position of being the most sought-after teacher in England. The problem is, not everyone can learn what he has to teach. Think about it this way. In our modern world, we understand that some skills require not just practice, but a fundamental shift in how you think about the world. Learning to fly a fighter jet isn't just about memorizing controls, it's about rewiring your brain to process information at speeds that would overwhelm most people. Wilfrid's technique requires something similar, but instead of technological mastery, it demands a complete transformation of how you exist in the natural world. After testing dozens of would-be students, knights who thought their battlefield experience would translate, merchants who thought they could buy their way to mastery, even a few desperate nobles who showed up with wagons full of gold, Wilfrid finally accepts 7 disciples. 7 men who demonstrate something more valuable than skill or wealth. The ability to understand that silent hunting means becoming a living shadow. The training takes place in a hidden valley called Ravenshollow, and if you think that name sounds ominous, you're absolutely right. This is a place where ancient Celtic stones still mark spots that the old religion considered sacred, where mist clings to the ground even on sunny days, and where the very air seems to whisper secrets from ages past. Here's what makes this training different from anything that had come before. Wilfred teaches them that crafting silent arrows isn't just about technique, it's about timing. The arrows must be made under moonlight, because as he explains to his bewildered students, daylight-made arrows carry the sun's voice. Now, to our modern minds, this sounds like pure superstition. But remember, these men are living in a world where the boundary between the physical and spiritual is much more fluid than we're comfortable with today. The discipline required is extraordinary. Picture grown men, warriors, hunters, people accustomed to taking what they want through force, sitting cross-legged in a circle at midnight, delicately wrapping sinew around owl feathers while chanting rhythms that match an elk's heartbeat. They practice on straw targets shaped like elk until they can strike the heart spot blindfolded, guided only by their breathing synchronized to their imagined prey's rhythm. But among these 7 disciples, one stands out like a beacon, Marcus Blackwood. Now Marcus is the son of a dispossessed Saxon noble, which in 1178 means his family once had power but backed the wrong side in some long-forgotten political struggle. He's got that particular combination of natural talent and burning ambition that makes him either a remarkable student or a dangerous rival, depending on how things develop. And his natural ability? It's unsettling, even to Wilfred. Where the other disciples struggle for months to achieve basic silence, Marcus masters it in weeks. Where others need perfect conditions, ace, still air, calm weather, cooperative elk, Marcus adapts the technique to work in rain, wind, even during thunderstorms, when most hunters wouldn't even venture outside. Together, teacher and gifted student push the boundaries of what's possible. They develop advanced techniques that sound like something out of a fantasy novel, shooting through falling leaves to mask any residual sound, using morning mist as natural camouflage, and most remarkably, the double silence shot where 2 arrows strike simultaneously from different angles, completely confusing the herd about where the danger is coming from. The Brotherhood? Because that's what they've become, a true brotherhood bound by shared secrets, develops an entire philosophy around their craft. They create a complex system of hand signals that allows coordinated hunts without spoken words. They develop chalk marks that can be left on trees, a secret language that tells other Brotherhood members about elk movements, weather patterns, even political developments that might affect their hunting grounds. But you know what they say about success breeding its own problems. By 1180, word of the Brotherhood's achievements has reached the royal court, and Prince John, yes, that Prince John, the one who would later become the king everyone loves to hate, decides he needs to see this silent hunting for himself. Picture the scene. The prince arrives at Ravenshallow with a full retinue, expecting the usual medieval entertainment of a hunting demonstration. Instead, he witnesses something that fundamentally challenges his understanding of how power works. Wilfred's hunters take 7 bull elk in complete silence, while the prince's own hunting party, Seacher, with their dogs, their horns, their elaborate pageantry, manages to catch absolutely nothing. 7 magnificent animals, each one representing weeks of meat for a village, brought down without the slightest disturbance to the rest of the herd. Prince John isn't stupid. Brutal, yes. Ambitious beyond measure, absolutely. But not stupid. He immediately recognizes what he's seeing, a military revolution disguised as a hunting technique. Think about it from his perspective. Armies that can hunt silently can also kill sentries and scouts without warning. They can eliminate guards without raising alarms. They can strike supply lines and disappear before anyone knows what happened. In an age where warfare depends heavily on information and surprise, silent killing represents a game-changing advantage. So, Prince John does what princes do. He demands that the Brotherhood serve the crown. The confrontation in the Great Hall of Nottingham Castle is the stuff of legend. On one side, you have Prince John with all the authority of royal blood, backed by armed knights and the implicit threat of force. On the other side, you have Wilfred, still dressed in his forest clothes, still carrying the scent of wood smoke and wild places, calmly explaining why his techniques cannot simply be commanded into existence. "Your Highness," Wilfred reportedly says, Silent hunting cannot be taken by force any more than you can capture the wind in a net. It must be earned through understanding, not acquired through conquest. It's a delicate negotiation. Prince John needs the Brotherhood's skills, but can't afford to appear weak by begging for them. Wilfrid needs royal protection for his disciples, but won't compromise the integrity of his teachings. The compromise they reach is elegant in its complexity. Wilfrid agrees to train select royal hunters in exchange for protection and exclusive hunting rights on royal lands. But the full techniques, the deepest secrets, remain with the Brotherhood. This arrangement plants seeds of resentment that will grow into much larger problems. Noble families who've built their reputations on traditional hunting prowess suddenly find themselves overshadowed by common-born men with superior skills. Economic interests that depend on controlling hunting territories discover that their ancient privileges mean nothing against silent arrows. The tensions explode during the Great Hunt of 1181, where competing factions of nobles sponsor different Brotherhood members in a contest to supply the royal feast. It's supposed to be a demonstration of skill, but it becomes something much more dangerous. A proxy war fought with bows instead of swords. And that's when Marcus Blackwood's ambition finally surfaces. He's been quietly experimenting with modifications to Wilfrid's technique, substituting crow feathers for owl feathers in pursuit of even greater silence. On paper, it's a logical innovation. Crow feathers are more readily available, easier to work with, and in his initial tests, they actually produce marginally less sound. But there's a crucial trade-off that Marcus either doesn't understand or chooses to ignore: the sacrifice of accuracy for silence. When his arrow merely wounds a magnificent elk instead of killing it cleanly, the wounded animal does what wounded animals do. It panics and charges directly into the crowd of spectators. Suddenly, what was supposed to be an elegant demonstration becomes a life-or-death emergency, with a 1,500-pound animal thrashing through a crowd of nobles who've never faced anything more dangerous than a stern lecture from their tutors. Wilfrid's response reveals why he remains the master. In a situation where most archers would need multiple shots or simply panic, he places a single arrow with surgical precision, dropping the elk instantly and saving multiple lives. But the damage to the Brotherhood's reputation is done. The nobles have seen that the student seeks to surpass the master, and that ambition has led to near disaster. More importantly, they've seen that Wilfrid's techniques, in the wrong hands, can fail spectacularly. The Brotherhood is about to enter its darkest hour. The decade of the 1180s transforms England in ways that most historians completely miss when they focus on the big political movements, the wars, the succession crises, the grand diplomatic maneuvers, because while kings and nobles are playing their games of thrones, something much more fundamental is happening at ground level. Wilfrid's Brotherhood is quietly revolutionizing how an entire society feeds itself. By 1185, after Christ, Brotherhood cells are operating from the Scottish borders all the way down to the Welsh marches. And here's what makes this expansion so remarkable. Each region adapts the core technique to local conditions in ways that demonstrate a level of practical innovation that would make modern engineers jealous. Highland hunters, working in terrain where long-range shots are essential, discover that golden eagle feathers provide the silence they need for distances that would be impossible with traditional owl fletching. Forest hunters in the New Forest, where close quarters stalking through dense undergrowth is the norm, prefer tawny owl feathers that allow for maximum stealth in confined spaces. But it's not just about technical variations. The economic impact becomes undeniable, and when I say undeniable, I mean the numbers are staggering by medieval standards. Territories with active Brotherhood hunters report 40% increases in sustainable meat harvests. 40%. In a world where a 5% increase in food production can mean the difference between a thriving village and a starving one, this represents nothing short of an economic revolution. Think about what that means in practical terms. More meat means larger populations. Larger populations mean more soldiers. More soldiers mean expanded military power. Villages that were struggling to maintain a dozen fighting men suddenly find themselves able to field companies of well-fed warriors. The transformation extends far beyond mere hunting efficiency. These Brotherhood-protected villages develop entirely new social structures where skill matters more than birth. Picture a world where a peasant who can place an arrow through a keyhole at 50 yards commands more respect than a knight whose only qualification is his bloodline. It's a fundamental challenge to everything medieval society considers natural and proper. The annual Feast of the Silent Arrow becomes a celebrated tradition that spreads throughout Brotherhood territories. These aren't just village festivals, they're elaborate competitions where hunters demonstrate shots that border on the impossible. Through keyhole gaps in trees, around corners using bent branches as guides, and the legendary mercy shot, Tei I Elk, killing an elk so cleanly and quickly that the animal never experiences fear or pain. But here's what makes these festivals truly dangerous to the established order. They serve as recruiting grounds, where young men and even some women prove their worthiness to learn the sacred techniques. In a society where women are supposed to be confined to domestic roles, the sight of a young woman placing arrows with precision that exceeds most knights' sword work represents a direct challenge to fundamental assumptions about gender and capability. Success, as we all know, breeds conspiracy. Bishop Reginald of Winchester, a man whose political ambitions are barely concealed behind religious rhetoric, RIS, declares silent hunting a form of witchcraft. His reasoning reveals the kind of twisted logic that characterizes medieval religious politics. He claims that bypassing the natural sounds of archery violates God's intended order, where man should triumph through strength and divine favor, not through stealth that mimics the behavior of animals. Now, to our modern minds, this sounds like obvious political maneuvering disguised as theology. But in the medieval world, accusations of witchcraft carry the full weight of ecclesiastical authority. Villages that host Brotherhood activities suddenly find themselves subject to church investigations. Hunters, who were celebrated as heroes, become fugitives hiding in the same forests where they once trained. Noble families who've lost prominence due to inferior hunting yields fund mercenary bands with explicit instructions to assassinate Brotherhood members. These aren't honorable military engagements, they're systematic campaigns of murder, designed to eliminate a perceived threat to traditional power structures. The violence escalates throughout the decade, but the real crisis emerges from within the Brotherhood itself. Marcus Blackwood, who's been leading his own faction since the disaster at the Great Hunt, makes a decision that transforms him from ambitious student to outright traitor. He offers to sell modified techniques to French agents who are preparing for what would eventually become large-scale military action against English territories. Think about the implications of this betrayal. The Brotherhood's techniques, which were developed to work in harmony with English forests and English elk, are being adapted for use against English armies. Marcus isn't just selling hunting methods. He's providing military intelligence that could cost thousands of English lives. The crisis peaks during the winter feast of 1189, when the Brotherhood gathers for what should have been their most sacred ceremony. Instead of celebration, they face the ultimate test of everything Wilfrid has taught them about the balance between skill and wisdom. The confrontation between master and fallen student takes place during a blizzard that would challenge even experienced woodsmen. But this isn't just a hunt. It's a duel, where both participants must use their ultimate skills while a massive elk herd grazes between them, unaware that they've become the stage for a battle that will determine the Brotherhood's future. Picture the scene. Two men who know each other's techniques intimately, stalking through a snowstorm while trying to avoid alerting a herd of elk that could trample either of them if startled. Each arrow must be perfect, not just in aim, but in timing, because a miss could send 1,500 pounds of panicked wildlife crashing through the forest. Wilfrid's victory comes at a terrible cost. Marcus's final arrow, fired even as he falls, carries poison derived from nightshade that the traitor had learned to prepare during his secret dealings with foreign agents. The wound isn't immediately fatal, but the poison works slowly, systematically shutting down the master's body even as his mind remains clear. In his final act as leader of the Brotherhood, Wilfrid makes a decision that ensures his techniques will survive, even if the organization doesn't. He destroys the complete technical manuscripts, Rube, the detailed instructions that could allow anyone to master silent hunting without understanding its deeper philosophical foundations. What he preserves are the teachings that emphasize harmony with nature over mere killing efficiency. the spiritual aspects that require years of patient study, the wisdom that transforms hunters into guardians of the natural world rather than mere killers. And then, in a gesture that becomes the stuff of legend, Wilfred vanishes into the deepest parts of Sherwood Forest, following tracks of the legendary white elk, Ise, a creature that some say exists only in stories, but which represents the ultimate test of any hunter's skill. He leaves behind only cryptic messages carved into the bark of ancient oak trees, symbols that future generations will spend centuries trying to decode. The Brotherhood's golden age is over, but its legacy is just beginning. The immediate aftermath of Wilfred's disappearance creates exactly the kind of chaos you'd expect when a revolutionary movement suddenly loses its unifying leader. By 1190 after Christ, the Brotherhood has splintered into competing schools, each claiming to possess the true teachings, each convinced that their interpretation represents Wilfred's authentic legacy. Some focus purely on the technical aspects, treating silent hunting like a mechanical skill that can be perfected through endless experimentation with different feathers, string materials, and arrow designs. These groups produce remarkable innovations, arrows that fly even more silently than Wilfred's originals, bows designed specifically for stealth hunting, camouflage techniques that make human hunters nearly invisible in forest environments. Others emphasize the spiritual dimensions, developing elaborate rituals around elk hunting that transform what was once a practical skill into something approaching a religious practice. They build stone circles in hidden forest clearings, conduct midnight ceremonies that blend Christian prayers with older Celtic traditions, and create initiation rites that test not just archery skills but psychological endurance. But the most successful synthesis comes from an unexpected source, the Abbey of St. Hubert, where a community of monks decides that Wilfred's techniques represent a form of divine revelation about humanity's proper relationship with the natural world. Think about this for a moment. These are medieval monks, people who've dedicated their lives to prayer, scholarship, and spiritual contemplation. They take Wilfred's purely practical hunting methods and transform them into a comprehensive philosophy that preserves the core techniques while adding their own innovations. Scent-masking herbs that neutralize human odor, camouflage cloaks woven with forest materials that break up the human silhouette so effectively that hunters can remain motionless just yards from grazing elk, meditation practices that allow archers to synchronize their heartbeats with their preys, achieving a level of calm that makes perfect accuracy almost inevitable. The monastic preservation of these techniques proves crucial during the chaos of the 100 Years' War, when English commanders rediscover Brotherhood methods through a manuscript hidden in a reliquary made from elk antlers. The symbolism is perfect, ancient wisdom preserved in the bones of the very creatures that inspired it. When military leaders adapt silent shooting methods for battlefield ambush tactics, the results are devastating. French chronicles from battles like Crécy and Agincourt describe something that sounds almost supernatural: English archers striking before enemies can hear. The bowstring's song, sentries found dead with arrows through their hearts while their fellow guards hear nothing in the night. The psychological impact is as important as the tactical advantage. Imagine being a French soldier, standing watch in the pre-dawn darkness, knowing that death might arrive without warning, without sound, without any chance for defense. It's a level of psychological warfare that medieval armies weren't equipped to handle. The Renaissance brings an entirely different kind of interest in Wilfred's legacy. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks contain sketches of arrow designs that are clearly inspired by Brotherhood techniques, complete with detailed observations about how spiral-attached feathers affect airflow. This is the same mind that designed flying machines and military fortifications, trying to understand the physics behind a medieval hunter's intuitive breakthrough. Spanish conquistadors, operating in the New World report, encountering indigenous hunters using remarkably similar silent hunting methods, which raises fascinating questions about parallel development versus ancient connections that predate recorded history. Did different cultures independently discover the same principles? Or are there knowledge traditions that span continents and centuries in ways we're only beginning to understand? The scientific revolution attempts to explain the physics of silent flight using the mathematical tools available to 17th and 18th century researchers. But here's what's remarkable. Early experiments consistently fail to replicate the full effectiveness of properly prepared owl feathers. The scientists can measure sound dampening and calculate trajectory modifications, but they miss some crucial element that only becomes clear when you understand Wilfrid's techniques as a complete system rather than a collection of separate innovations. The industrial age nearly destroys the Brotherhood's legacy entirely. Archery seemed primitive and obsolete. Forests that once harbored elk herds are cleared for farmland and factories. The ancient knowledge traditions that kept Wilfrid's techniques alive become curiosities studied by antiquarians rather than practical skills passed down through apprenticeship. But then something remarkable happens. Modern archaeological discoveries, in 1998, uncover a cache of perfectly preserved arrows in a Sherwood Forest cave, their fletching intact after 8 centuries underground. When forensic analysis confirms the use of eagle-owl feathers attached with the exact spiral pattern described in medieval texts, it sparks a renaissance of interest in traditional archery techniques. Contemporary traditional archers successfully recreate Wilfrid's methods, achieving near-silent shots that allow elk hunting at ranges previously thought impossible without modern firearms. The physics finally make sense when analyzed with 21st-century acoustic engineering, revealing that the spiral feather attachment creates microvortices that cancel out the sound frequencies generated by arrow flight. But here's what makes this modern revival truly remarkable. It's not just about hunting anymore. Wildlife researchers discover that silent observation techniques allow them to study elk behavior without the disturbance caused by traditional human presence. Conservation efforts benefit from methods that let scientists monitor animal populations without altering natural patterns. The techniques that Wilfrid developed for killing elk become tools for protecting and understanding them. There's something profoundly appropriate about this transformation. The skills that emerged from one man's grief and obsession, that revolutionized medieval warfare and influenced centuries of tactical development, ultimately evolve into methods for preserving the very creatures that inspired them. And if you believe the stories, and after everything we've explored, why wouldn't you? Some say that on misty mornings in what remains of Sherwood Forest, you can still catch glimpses of a lone hunter following invisible tracks through the ancient trees. They say he carries a bow made from wood that predates the Norman conquest, fletched with feathers from birds that have been extinct for centuries. They say he's still pursuing that perfect silence that unites predator and prey in nature's eternal dance, still seeking the white elk that exists somewhere between legend and reality. Whether you believe those stories or not, the truth remains. One man's innovation, born from personal tragedy and transformed through years of patient observation, created ripples that are still spreading 8 centuries later. From the battlefields of medieval France to the research stations of modern conservation science, from the monasteries of the Middle Ages to the workshops of contemporary traditional archers, Wilfrid's legacy continues to evolve. In a world where technology changes so rapidly that last year's innovations become this year's obsolete curiosities, there's something deeply satisfying about a technique that remains as effective today as it was in 1173 after Christ. Silent arrows still fly true, elk still fall to perfectly placed shots, and somewhere in the morning mist, the eternal conversation between hunter and hunted continues in whispers only the forest can hear. The legend of Wilfrid of Sherwood isn't just history, it's a continuing story, written in the flight of silent arrows and the footprints of those who still choose to walk the ancient paths.